All right, so let's see the topics that we're thinking about discussing today. I'm not sure if we're going to have enough time. Um, the first one is morality, then that's either going to drip into veganism or free will, depending on which one is more relevant to the conversation that we're currently having on morality. And then we're going to, well, we said we were going to try to dissect a strong argument for God and kind of give our response to it, whether it be the Kalam cosmological arguments or the blind watchmaker argument. Um, but we'll see what happens. So, as always, thank you very much for tuning in to the Secular Atom. We currently don't have a title for this podcast.
Yes, we are one of many nameless podcasts.
Yeah, but when we upload this, it will have a title, so you're listening to an already named podcast, but at the time of recording, it is not named. So, anyways, how are you doing?
I am doing well. I am coming off of a mild cold, so I will speak somewhat nasally, but I will try to avoid.
Yeah, so this is going to be interesting. You and I are both kind of on the same side when it comes to theology, I guess. Both of us are secularists, and so the one thing that I would be concerned about whenever we do talk about religion or talk about God is that we're pretty much just saying the same thing, and we're kind of repeating each other's talking points.
Yes, I understand that, and I will try to avoid boring, circular. I don't know. I don't want to say circle jerk, but that's what it will be. So avoiding circle jerks and focusing on interesting conversations that we might actually have some insights to make.
Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting experiment to see what it is that we disagree on.
Yeah.
Because there's bound to be a few things, and I'm already about a beer in, so let's see if hopefully you'll be able to shut me up.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. So we wanted to start, but first a message from our sponsors, Weed. Weed is today's sponsor.
Oh, really?
Just
weed.
Just weed.
Okay.
I've never had any, but I'm sure it's great.
I'm going to be in the minority here. I prefer to be drunk than high.
All right.
Small minority. But thank you very much for our sponsor, Weed. Amazing. We already got a sponsor on our first episode. This is impressive.
It's great.
Eat your heart out, Joe Rogan. So, all right. So let's get on. The first thing that we want to talk about is one that we definitely have some disagreements on, and we talked about an hour and a half this last time we met, and we got nowhere. I would say
we got a little somewhere. I don't know. We sort of understand a tiny bit of our disagreement, but it is on the all-encompassing topic of objective morality. Very, very common, I would say, disagreement to have with people. There's Sam Harris, Matt Dillahunty, who have a sort of, I don't know how to describe it. It's like a secular objective morality in contrast to many older religious objective moralities. I am on the position I'm a moral anti-realist. I don't believe in any morality, but we also might disagree on what we define as morality, so we'll have to get to that. What's your position?
Yeah, so I'm a moral realist, but probably a moral realist in a way that would be unpredictable, I should say, because it's definitely not something that most people would assume. But I agree with you that first thing, we need to get our definitions straight, because we could probably just have two completely different definitions of morality. So give me your spiel. What do you think morality is? How would you define it? And what do you think, or how do you justify your case for moral anti-realism?
So I view morality as intrinsically linked with ought claims. So you ought to be moral. There is some sort of moral system or moral proclamations, and then you ought to follow them. Otherwise, it's sort of meaningless. Like you can say that there's this preferable state of the world, a moral one, but you should not pay any attention to it. It doesn't matter. Like you behave the same way you behave normally. There's no ought here. It exists, but whatever. You can follow it or you cannot. whatever you prefer to do. But that to me isn't morality, or as morality as most people usually use it. That's maybe like a maxim or something. Um, so that's not morality for me. But for me, morality could be anything depending on who I'm talking to. So what is your definition of morality?
So the way I would define morality is that I agree with Sam Harris on the idea that morality is intrinsically linked with well-being. And the reason why I agree with this is because no matter which culture you look at, whether it be the Middle Eastern, Muslims, or really any other culture, they all ultimately have this final goal of wanting to have a better society than we currently are at right now. Even a suicide bomber who is trying to blow up the nearest restaurant because he doesn't agree with the way that different Muslims interpret their doctrine, he's doing it under the impression that he is creating a society better for tomorrow. He's doing it under the impression that he is following God's command, who knows best for society. And I think this is, at the end of the day, everyone ultimately cares about human well-being. And I think that's probably, because most people view it this way, and because when people talk about morality, it's always somehow linked with well-being. Even Christians, right, who just hate homosexuals and want homosexuality banned, are doing so.
Not all Christians.
Some, that's why I said some. Some are doing so under the impression that they expect that human well-being and society would be better off in a world where there was no homosexuality because the Bible demands it. So because of this, I think the best definition that we have for morality would be one that is associated with human well-being.
So I would agree with that most people care something about well-being. My problem is I think people behave more individualistically than this. People don't care about overall well-being. So, for example, if some random person that you've never met in East Asia, like tripped or something, it would affect you much, much less than if you did, or your friends did, or your family did. So people have a very, very uh, self-centered uh, view of well-being. So each person cares about their well-being, and then the people nearby them, the people they like, and they might even care negatively for the well-being of people they dislike. So each person's individual uh, caringness, is a random word, um, is different. Like you will take a different person, and their function on the state of the world is different. So there is no grand human well-being, but rather personal well-beings that are linked with people, right? So, like if like we have empathy, right? So if somebody I like succeeds in their dream, I will feel happy for them because we have empathy. But I wouldn't say that we care about the exact same well-being. We have our own personal individual well-beings that might have some overlap, but they are not universal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Paul Bloom wrote about this in his book Against Empathy. Paul Bloom, if you guys don't know, I think his title is a psychologist at Yale University. He's a brilliant man, and he wrote about this in his book Against Empathy, which is a very interesting title, and I recommend. It's a pretty short read. I recommend anybody read it. But what he discusses in the book is how, as you mentioned, the different levels of empathy that we have. So we have less empathy for people that we don't like. We have more empathy for people who we do like, or for our close relatives of us, or who are specifically living within our city as opposed to across the Atlantic Ocean. And so I think you're right on that point. However, what I would say is that the way that we understand empathy, or the reason why we have empathy for people, is because, well, one, it was obviously evolutionarily beneficial to us. You only need to read a few books on evolution to understand how reciprocal altruism works. And the other thing I would also add is that I would link this to the way I described well-being for humans. So people who you don't have empathy with, people who you don't like, the reason you don't have empathy for them is most likely because you don't feel that they're having a positive contribution to society. You don't think they're a good person, or they've done something wrong to you, and therefore you have to reciprocate that level of animosity that they have. So you think that
Well, that's for people that you do know, but you still don't have empathy for them, rather than people that you don't know and don't have empathy for them.
Yeah, and we can also have another conversation about tribalism, in-group and out-group thinking. That's also associated with empathy. But I wouldn't. I would say that morality. We make moral decisions before we even feel empathy. So, as you said, there are people that we feel empathy for and people that we don't feel empathy for. But the decision to feel empathy for a particular person is made before we even have that feeling of empathy. So moral decisions are being made before the feelings, the sensations of empathy are being made. So there's clearly some distinctions in morality that we have that isn't necessarily associated with feelings that we have, such as, as you described. And so the reason why I would describe morality best within the context of human well-being is because no matter what conversation you have, no matter at which angle you look at it for, it is always linked with human well-being, with wanting to empathize with people in your group, and wanting to empathize with people out your group. That's kind of why I said that people that you don't empathize with tend to have you think that they tend to have a negative impact on society. So, yeah, I agree with you 100%. There are people that we just don't associate with morally, and these are generally people that are outside our country, outside our view in general, or who aren't related to us. But at the end of the day, even though we can all agree on this fact, we would also all agree that we would prefer for humans to be happy rather than to be depressed or anxious or just deprived of any of the necessities that is required in life. And yeah, that's what I think.
Um, the thing is, I can always. So here, let me posit some like game theory-esque situations, like the prisoner's dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
In the prisoner's dilemma, there's some sort of maxim. Like there's a optimal for if you took the points that everybody gets, for example, the amount of years in prison that they will have in total, you can reduce that if they all act against their own selfish best interest,
Mm-hmm.
but for this grand maxim. So I can say that a person ought to behave selfishly if they care, if they care about themselves, or I can say they ought to act uh, in the way that's towards the maxim uh, for some grand moral reason.
Mm-hmm.
But I will never be able to convince somebody to act against their own self-interest, because to do so I would have to appeal to something that they care about. So I can say you ought to act against your own self-interest for blank, but then I can't make a convincing argument to tell somebody that they ought to do something. How do you tell somebody to act for this grand morality that maximizes well-being to some degree? I don't know if it's actually maximizing or whatever. How do you tell somebody to do that, even if it ultimately harms them?
Yeah. So, for one thing, would you and I both agree on the fact that it is considered a virtue in society to want to act in the benefit of more people as opposed to yourself? It's better to act altruistically than it is better to act selfishly. At least that is the way it is viewed as a virtue in society. Would you agree with me on that
Yes,
one?
of course.
So I think that would indicate that there is this general trend that we as Homo sapiens tend to go towards, and that trend is this altruistic sense that we have. Now,
It's a very human-centric empathy, though. It's like we care about the flourishing of humanity, right?
Mhm.
People do care about the flourishing of humanity up until it personally affects them negatively,
Yeah.
right? So if you can say, I'm for, space exploration and everybody being successful and educated until I have to sacrifice, I have to pay a massive, like 90% taxes or something.
Yeah, well, just because someone isn't going to react in the way that we would expect them to react doesn't mean that they're not um, that they're not responding to an objective concept. So it's like just because I think that morality is objective and some people are not following what would be considered moral, I
Okay,
mean, that doesn't make
so
moral.
if in your definition of morality, I get it, it's objective. But are you able to tell somebody that they ought to follow this morality,
Mhm.
um, even if it ultimately harms them, including the calculations of empathy?
Mhm.
So even if it makes them, they have empathy, right? Even if that empathy benefits them, they still are harmed by it. Like it sacrifices more than the empathy. Would you still tell them that they ought to follow this moral
So the
morality?
oughts and is distinction is probably the biggest thing that many people get hung up about, and I think it's an illusion. This is something Sam Harris also says that the ought and is distinction is an illusion, but I have a different way of viewing it because I don't think meaning. All right, so I'm going to try to go slow with this one because this one is a bit of a kind of Deepak Chopra level answer, but I don't think it is. I don't think meaning exists in the sense that when people ask, what is my purpose in life? What is the meaning of the universe? I think those questions are equally as nonsensical as asking what is the color of jealousy, because meaning doesn't exist. We simply have the laws of physics, the laws of
It
evolution.
doesn't exist objectively.
It exists conceptually,
It
but
exists for people. People, uh, in their actions, they do their actions for certain desires. People have desires descriptively, and then they act upon those. So, is that meaning? Maybe not, but that's how people tend to behave.
yeah, sure.
My
But
perspective.
meaning doesn't exist as a general,
Sure.
aspect of the universe. And so, because of that, I would say that because meaning does not exist, and therefore you can't make the claim that because something is a particular way, then therefore this you should expect this out of another way. So, for instance, a lot of people will often say, if you don't believe in God, then why don't you go rape and do all this stuff that you might as well be doing? Well, you're invoking meaning into what I perceive to be a meaningless world, so it makes no sense to even ask that question. Now, this probably will
Well,
also
you can just say, I don't want to.
that's the easier answer, yeah. But if you want to get even more philosophically, get your nails dirty, then well, you go down the Deepak Chopra route. But that question doesn't make any sense to me, and this is going to bleed more into probably our conversation about free will, where you can ask maybe you can ask a cricket, you can ask a monkey the same exact question when it comes to the is and not distinction, and they'll be completely confused because it never reaches their mind. For them, there's no such thing as you ought to do this or you should do this. It's just I just do this.
So for you, you have like I can conceive of a thought experiment where everybody's a robot.
Mhm.
Every single person is exactly the same, but they are a robot. They have no, maybe this is actually the world. Like maybe this is not even a thought experiment. Maybe the world is we're all just like machines, biological machines. Um, but here you have this system that everybody is robots, and we all know exactly how everybody works. Um, but so is there a morality in the system? And they are all interacting the same ways we do.
Yes.
So there is a morality in the
Yes.
system. And the morality is what?
Being concerned with the well-being of the robots.
So like the robots in their system, they act in ways that benefit other robots.
Mm-hmm.
How do you describe benefit?
Well, I mean the same way I would describe benefit here, altruistic behavior, um, altruistic behavior, sorry, and really any kind of any type of philanthropy that some people could probably come up with, or maybe putting, five people ahead of your own self. Now, these are very basic arguments, of course, basic statements, but I would say any argument that you can make that would be moral behavior for us would be moral behavior for that world as well.
So the actions of these robots are an action. What does it mean for an action to benefit a robot?
To benefit their own self?
Yeah,
Or to
their
benefit,
well-being.
Oh, to benefit their well-being.
The well-being of a robot.
Well, I mean, I would always bring it back to what we've been evolutionarily programmed to consider moral. Because the reason why there are some things that we consider moral and some things
Well,
that
so the robots in this case
Mhm.
do things, right? They have actions. Their actions are programmed in, right? And maybe they can be maybe one robot can reprogram another to change their desires. Ooh, you can have some like circular
Yeah.
logic in there too. But you have this system where robots have desires not based off of any like moral system. They just that's how they're programmed. They will do this because that's what their programming is. Um, so like one punching another robot, maybe that will lower that robot's uh, like the robot was programmed to avoid that situation. Um, but it's all meaning like it's all just like taking like sand and throwing it. It's all just like totally deterministic actions
Mm-hmm.
of electronics in the end. Uh, there's no morality here. Like there's just interactions, electronics. It's all like deterministic. Maybe it's a complex deterministic simulation. But I don't see any morality in there. Besides that, each robot is programmed with certain to do certain things, given certain inputs, and maybe each one internally has uh, has certain states of the world that it prefers, right? So this robot here prefers a state where it is has more, space. Maybe like it has more space over a state where it has less space. So internally, the robot has this preference, but externally, there's no like objective morality, and that's why I don't see an objective morality. For me, like each robot may have preferences, desires, and they will act upon those desires, but it will never be objective. There's no correct morality.
So let me ask you a few questions. Um, Two questions, actually. One, did the robots undergo the same evolutionary tree that we did?
Well, sure.
Sure.
Or maybe they were just programmed that way.
And two, are they conscious?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah, I still think that if they underwent the same exact evolutionary tree that we did, I would say that they still have an objective
So
morality.
your morality is based on, let me get this straight, on how we got those desires.
My moral, okay, so
Not what that those desires exist, but
Yeah.
how we got to them.
yeah, so the way my morality is based on, I probably should have said this. We probably should have both said this at the beginning. Um, so we are the product of billions of years of evolution. No one can deny that, right? Homo sapiens, I think, have been here for around 300,000 years or somewhere around there.
I'm not
I
sure.
can't quite remember. But because there are better and worse methods for reproducing our own genes and passing it on to the next generation and preserving the species, then we consider that there are some ways of living life that are better than other ways. So it's better to be nice to your neighbors in hopes that they're going to respond in the same manner as you rather than kill them.
So you're saying like these are
well-
universally, or maybe like generally true statements
Yeah, yeah.
that you should do for your own interest.
Well, yeah. So basically, so we've all kind of evolved to acknowledge that this is what we need to do if we want to preserve the species. Now, again, I've already given my thoughts on the is and not distinction. I don't think it makes any sense anymore than it makes sense to ask what the color of
Well, this will get into the veganism quite nicely because you have this like arbitrary distinction for species. Like,
Yeah.
well, we need to preserve the species.
Yeah, I'm excited.
But why do we need to preserve the species?
Well, hold on. So because of this, because of the way that we've evolved and because of the way that we've analyzed the way that we interact with one another, and we understand that there are better ways and there are worse ways of interacting with one another in society. So we've all come up with a general understanding of what it means to be moral. Even if we have different conflicting ideologies, at the baseline of every moral intuition that we have is this idea of human well-being. No matter which direction you look, that is the baseline. Can we at least agree on that?
I would say that it's personal well-being. Like for me, the only thing I care about is personal well-being. But because I have empathy, because of that empathy and my built-in programming of evolution to care about human well-being, that the human well-being is a consequence of the evolution. But in the end, I only care about human well-being because it makes my personal well-being more.
Well, this goes back to the definitions that we have. So when I define morality, it's basically encapsulating all of the evolution that we've had and the desires that we have to want to continue to preserve the species. There's nothing metaphysical or supernatural about the morality that I'm viewing. I'm viewing it specifically as this definition that we've come up with, or that we've all kind of agreed on one way or another, and there are objective methods of increasing the level of well-being for a society and decreasing it.
So okay, so I sort of agree with that, and that I think goes back to that like chess analogy, right?
Mhm.
Do you want to make the chess analogy, or should I make my best? So you have like a chess game, right? And the goal is to win, and then there's certain actions that we can objectively decide if they are beneficial to the goal of winning, and then there's actions that are detrimental, right? Like sacrificing a queen for no reason would be objectively a bad idea, even if we don't actually know with perfect information the whole system. We know as general guidelines that that's a bad move, right? I get this analogy, right? So if your definition is our goal is human well-being, so you say this is the goal, and we all tend to agree on that this is the goal, then there are certain actions that are objectively better to reach that goal.
Yes.
I agree with that. My problem comes where I don't think everybody has the same goal. Like for me, yes, we sort of have the same goal, a little bit. Like we all kind of care about the human well-being, at least partially. But I propose that people care more about themselves, their own personal happiness, than they care about some ultimate well-being. And if the ultimate well-being comes at the cost of their own personal benefit, that they will take their personal benefit almost every time.
Let's see if we can find something to agree on here, then. So, do you consider health to be objective?
I would suggest that that all of us, or most of us, share very similar positions on health, such that if you took a random person and you fixed their broken arm, they will probably be happy about it.
Yeah.
But it's in the same way as saying, if every single person on Earth believed that chocolate ice cream was tastier than vanilla ice cream, does that make chocolate ice cream objectively tastier than vanilla ice cream? I would say no, it's just a very popular opinion. So in that same way where, yes, okay, even if every single person cared about, having all of their limbs intact, that's a very popular opinion.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it objectively true that this is preferable.
Yeah, well, I think there's a huge confusion between those two analogies. So, one, taste would be completely associated. Taste can be different among specific populations, and they would be different regardless of what information that they would have, because taste buds change every 7 years. So, what would be tasty to somebody would be objectively disgusting to another person by definition. But you can't say the same thing about health, because you can still describe the estimated amount of years that you're expected to live after you have been diagnosed with a particular disease.
That's why I specifically distinguish not whether somebody's healthier, but whether they care about it.
Yeah. So whether or not they care about it, I think, the fact that most people care about it, the fact that we've been evolutionarily programmed to care about it, is really what matters. And that's the part of the definition that I really care about. And as I said, I think the is and not distinction is an illusion. But what I always say, within the context of health, and when we talk about it, is that, as you said, we can easily distinguish a person who is healthy and someone who is not healthy, based on the criteria that we've come up with, which is also closely associated with human well-being.
Yes, we know what a healthy human is.
Yes.
And if somebody is not that, we can take certain steps in order to get them.
But this is all, of course, because of the way that
the value judgment is where the problem is, right? If we say that a healthier person is preferable than a sick person, I would prefer to be healthier than sick. Right?
But why do you prefer that? Because you want to live longer. You want to live a longer life. So there are some values that we all agree on. These values don't need to
be... In the same way as the chocolate vanilla, just because if every single person cares about living longer, that's a very popular opinion to me. That doesn't make it an objective fact that people ought to live longer.
Right. But there's a huge difference in the sense that the same information that you can extract from understanding who is healthy and who is not cannot be analogized or whatever, analogized to the type of information that you would get from someone who finds chocolate tasty and someone who prefers vanilla. This is two completely different sets of states of mind that we
Okay.
would
So
be
the health, like the actual health of a
yeah.
person.
So long as we have a description, a definition of what it means to be healthy. It doesn't matter whether or not you want to be healthy. It doesn't matter if there are 2 people who prefer to die at the early age of 10 and 98 people who prefer to live on until their hundreds. We have a definition, and this definition is molded by the fact that most people in the history of humanity have defined it this way. Then we can very easily say someone is objectively healthier than another person.
So if you define collective well-being of humans in a certain way, doesn't matter, right? It could be, even though we can't have like a totally agreed upon one, we can theorize some sort of metric for collective human well-being. Then yes, I would agree that there are objective ways to get to that goal. But I once again come back to the problem of I, as a person, if it hurts me to go to that goal, I wouldn't do it. Now, as a society, should we strive? So, like, if you were to randomly select who you are, if you were to randomly be somebody in this world, can you make a situation that the random person you were selected is the best off? And that would be our grand definition of well-being. You're randomly selected from all humans. Then yes, I would say that you can, create a better world. Like, that this economic policy will benefit us the most, or this, environmental policy will benefit us the most. Absolutely. But I am appealing when I say that, when I say we should implement this, I am intrinsically appealing to the average person's benefit, right?
Yeah.
So if I say we should increase taxes on the wealthy people, as a policy, this increases well-being. All right, who's that convincing to? Poor people, middle-class people. Who's that not convincing to? Rich people who get hurt from it. Will that maximize collective well-being? Probably, right? So when I say this is something, an objective statement to get to this goal that we have decided on. The goal is collective well-being of some degree. This is a policy that will objectively get us there better. It benefits more people than it hurts. In fact, it would probably benefit a lot of people a lot. But it hurts this smaller demographic. Should I tell somebody, this rich person who will get hurt from it, that they ought to support this position on moral grounds?
Yes.
So you would say they ought to support it on moral grounds.
Well, I mean, you already know my thoughts on the is and not distinction, but I would say that they it would be moral to support it. I would say. I don't disagree that people have different opinions on how to have a moral society.
It's moral to, right?
I don't associate.
But you would be unable to convince them, right? Because how would you convince them that they should do this? Well, because I couldn't.
Yeah.
I would just say this maximizes collective utility. If you care about that, then you should do it.
I probably wouldn't be able to convince them, but my argument rests on the fact of the way that I'm defining morality, and I think this is the way that we would have to define morality if we were to define it based on the collective understanding that we have of how moral systems work, and that's the way there are objective methods to increase the overall well-being. So, for instance, you said yes, it's going to harm some people, but it will benefit others, or it will benefit more. Well, then by definition, we can say that you are creating a net increase in well-being, and that would therefore be a moral decision.
Yeah. So your morality is pretty much like some game theory maxim or something, right? And I, once we agree on this, then I'm all board, right? Mm-hmm. This is objective morality, how you define it. It just, for me, the association of oughts, like moral ought, you ought to do this for some reason. That's where I be like, okay, yes, this morality exists, how you define it, but I will only be able to convince somebody to act morally if they care about this goal. Like if they think that this goal will benefit them, and not by by appealing to something transcendental.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be like in the robot's case, right? I will as a robot, I will convince all the other robots that they should act in this way because it'll benefit them.
Mm-hmm.
It might hurt some others, and they might be like, no, no, no. But because more people will benefit than not, the power dynamics will be such that it will pass.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give my last statement and then I'll let you finish it off on this topic because we've been going on for around 30 minutes. Yeah, I don't disagree at all that people can be selfish. I'm a big fan of Cormac McCarthy, so of course I have to abide by that fact. But even though people are selfish, these are very extreme examples. In the contemporary society that we're living in today, we're living in a society where those decisions very rarely, almost never need to be made. So, and as I've said, I don't associate morality with the is and ought distinction because I don't think those things exist in the universe that we live in. So it's pointless to even.
Ought, is you just mean ought doesn't exist?
Yeah, meaning doesn't exist.
Okay.
I guess. Meaning doesn't exist, and like as I said, this will bleed into our conversation on free will. And because of this, because we've all collectively decided on what can be considered moral and what can be considered immoral, for instance, if it was evolutionarily beneficial to be killing the person sitting on your left at all times, then we'd be having a conversation about whether or not it's moral to continuously kill the person sitting on your left in our classrooms. But because we've all decided at a particular underlying definition of human well-being for morality, and that's the way that most people would view morality, I think that's a good definition. And so long as we have that definition intact, morality has to be at least as objective as we view health to be. And I'll let you finish off your closing statement.
Closing statement. This is very official suddenly.
Yeah, it's official.
But no, I can say descriptively that people have empathy, but I will never be able to say somebody ought to have empathy in the same way that the is ought distinction that you do not believe in. Just because for me, people will act altruistically, and that's a good thing. Otherwise, we'd have some game theory war. But I will never be able to convince somebody to do that. So I will have I can have the morality, but I will never be able to say something that tell somebody that they should be moral, right? And I think this will be interesting if we go into veganism now, because you brought up this care about people, like humans.
Yeah.
This human well-being. Well, what happens if you have a part of the population now suddenly wants to expand that into suddenly now it's animals?
Yeah, expand the moral circle.
Expand the moral circle. For me, it's quite easy. I'm like, I don't, if a cow, my utility for a cow, there's some empathy utility, right? Like cows are cute and I like them, right? But then there's some like food utility, right? And if my food utility is more than my cuteness utility, then I will be fine with the cow being eaten, right? So for me, human utility is I'm not going to eat a human, right? I have no desire to. I'm not a cannibal at this moment. So my utility for a human is built-in intrinsic empathy. I like people. And then they're like economic value, like they create things, create entertainment, create technology. So that utility, so the average person benefits me, right? So I have no negative utility, like no desire to kill a human at the present moment. While for an animal, my utility for an animal is mostly their food.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I would, that's why I'm not a vegan, right?
Yeah.
But it's not this like we should care about humans for some like presupposed reason, right? Like this is just a thing that we should care about all humans. It's purely a utilitarian, personal, selfish utilitarian, which takes into account empathy. Like all things being equal, I'd prefer if animals didn't suffer, right? So, I don't know if you want to go into veganism now or you want to go into free will.
Yeah. I mean, we could. This is a topic that I've only sparingly thought to myself with. So I'm not fully convinced on what my stance on veganism is. But as I think about it more, I'm inching my way towards becoming at least a vegetarian.
Really?
Yeah, who knows? Um, so let me ask you this question then. The reason why you don't eat humans, is it a combination of because you empathize with the pain that they would feel and you don't want them to feel that pain because you know how terrible it would be to feel it? Or is it just completely, and also because of the utility, or is it just because of your own personal utility?
Is it just
Or is that sense of
well,
empathy
my
part of the
personal
utility?
utility includes empathy,
Includes
right?
empathy? Okay.
Yeah.
So then if you were to find out that an animal was suffering at the same degree that a human being was, would then that increase your level of sensitivity towards the sensations that an animal would feel?
So yes, right? Like those, that's why if you go to some like animal rights group, they will show you horrible videos of like chickens being killed and heads cut off and cows being whatever, right? And getting holes in their stomach, right? That's why they show you that their emotional appeals and emotional appeals work,
Hmm.
right? Um, the
So would you
problem
change it then?
if you know if the empathy reached me like so much so that I can't, the empathy's too strong, I can't handle it, then yeah.
Hmm.
But they've never reached that point. Um, that like, first of all, I want to clarify. I'm talking purely ethical veganism. Like, there's environmental reasons for veganism that are totally reasonable. Like, you
Hmm.
can make good claims. I would still take the position that even, if you take two states of the world, one where everybody's a vegan and one where nobody is, I'd still maybe, prefer one where everybody can eat meat if they wanted to, just because I like it so much. But maybe you can reprogram me so I don't. I don't know. It's interesting, but that purely ethical veganism arguments is what I'm talking about, and those arguments are always emotional appeals every time. Like because you they otherwise you'd be saying you ought to care about this thing, like this animal. Um, and once again, you can't make an argument like that. Those never work. So you have to increase my empathy such that my utility would suddenly go down, and I would suddenly care more about animals. Um, so I don't know. Is that like so? Yes. So yes, I take into account my empathy, but I still like to eat meat
Hmm.
more than the empathy, suffering that I
Right.
get.
But what would that be because of the current knowledge that you have of the conscious state of the animal? So if tomorrow some scientific studies were to be to come out and scientists would reach a consensus on the fact that humans are just as conscious, sorry, that animals are just as conscious as humans are, and they have been
I'm sure
feeling.
some animals, like I'm sure cows are just as conscious as
I'm not
humans.
saying they are, but in this hypothetical scenario, just trying to see
Yeah.
how
No, they
malleable
could
your
be more
morality is.
conscious. Like they can, whales are probably more conscious. They might have more complex societal interactions than us, like certain like orcas.
So because of that, would
But
you
it
be
just
okay with eating whale?
the problem is it's impossible to quantify, right?
But let's say we could quantify it.
If you how do you- how could you
Well, I mean, you
quantify
can.
empathy?
I mean, technically, you can quantify everything. I would argue.
I don't know. So it's one of those like my show me a horrible video of an animal being tortured, and my human intrinsic empathy barometer just like goes up, right? Like this is horrible. I don't want to see this anymore.
Hmm.
But at the same time, uh, like we kill dogs all the time, right? Like, and people are totally fine with it. We do it in pounds.
Oh, not anymore. There's a huge.
We do it all the time.
Well, I mean, I would say that I would argue that the moral zeitgeist is changing in a direction that is more
Like if you
concerned
told me
for.
somebody skins a cat, it'll totally depend on the context whether I'll be like, oh, that's horrible, and oh, that's okay. Like if you tell me somebody's skinning a cat just for fun and they're enjoying it, I'll be like, that's horrible. But if you're telling me that they're euthanizing a cat or multiple cats, thousands of cats every day because they create tons of there's certain countries that are so overpopulated with cats that it's like a total disaster, right? They're everywhere and they're causing a whole bunch of problems. Then we'd be like, fine, kill a cat,
But
right?
you still feel bad for the cat dying, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of the reason why you'd feel horrible about the person just skinning a cat for fun is probably just because of anger that you have towards that person.
Yeah, well, it would be a sign that this person is troubled.
Yeah, but no matter what, you feel bad for the cats. And if you were to find out that that cat was just as conscious and felt just as much pain as human beings, then would that amplify your empathy?
Uh, I don't know if it would amplify my empathy.
You
Right,
would
'cause
feel
I'm-
more empathy?
Because, okay, you try this experiment. Like, say, here's a rock. You hit the rock, nothing. Now I'm telling you that this rock is feels as much pain as a human. Does this amplify your empathy for this rock, this abstract rock?
I'd probably feel horrible, yeah. If we were to find out that rocks were actually living entities this whole time, cells were
No,
conscious...
but I'm
and they
talking
were-
about the abstract, like here, I'm telling you that this rock
Well, just
has more empathy. That, it's
well,
not.
no, but that's because I don't believe you.
It was fair enough, right? That's why that's why emotional arguments are always so, like, they're so hard because it's purely human intuition, right? With no reason involved whatsoever.
Yeah, but that intuition is informed by the evidence that we have around us. So, I would believe that a rock is conscious if there was a consensus among geologists or rock scientists or whatever.
Yeah, but would you like, for example, like you got abortion arguments where they're always like, here, you should care about this zygote.
Yeah.
It's like, here's a bundle of cells, empathize with it.
But that's because they have a different definition of human life than we do. If they were to have the same definition of life as we do, then they would value it just as much as we do.
No, but you can take a zygote and slowly adjust the lever until it's now formally a fetus and then maybe even a baby, right? As time goes on, your empathy for it grows. You would less and less care if it dies, right?
Yes.
Like if it's just a bundle of cells, you don't care. If it's a baby, you care a lot. Built into your ethos, right? Like into your evolution. This is something you care about. This is something you don't. Is there, is there a point where, it's that you should kill it? It's mostly arbitrary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you take just a few more cells, right? One more cell. At some point, you just arbitrarily say, the empathy is too much. Like, I care too much about this bundle of cells that I will not allow it. It has a heartbeat, it has a face, right? Like, my empathy meter I care now more about this bundle of cells than I care about the woman who might suffer if she has to take care of this child, right? Like, my empathy meter is too high.
Well, it wouldn't be arbitrary. We can safely say that there are states that we say are more conducive to the empathy that we have towards this fetus than when it was just barely conceived. So just because we for instance, it's like saying, no one goes to sleep middle-aged and they wake up old. It's just kind of the spectrum, right? But there is a transition from middle-aged to old, and there are states between those two transitions that we can safely designate as either middle-aged or as old.
Yes. Well, yes, it has certain properties that we can distinguish, right? But we should care about them. Like, it's all, once again, it goes back to, ought you do this? And I'm like, if you, you should do it if you care about it. Like, if you're given an option of, you have this range, right? And, I don't know, this is dumb, but you get $0 if you kill it when it's just a zygote, and you get $1,000 if you kill it when it's a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And then every time step from there on, you get more and more money. How do you decide?
I mean, it'd be difficult for us to determine when to decide, but that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be an answer that benefits or maximizes our own personal interests.
Yeah, but
Based
for
on,
me,
of course, the
so for me
combination of
now I
empathy
have
and...
monetary
Yeah.
interests. I attached arbitrary monetary interests to purely emotional interests.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is just like my empathy. Like I would feel bad about this, such that now you have this weird equation that has both empathy interests and monetary interests simultaneously, and that's confusing. And it's I don't know. I don't have a solution for this.
Yeah,
but like,
it's confusing, but I wouldn't say that because it is confusing, therefore there is no answer.
well,
Or
do you
that
think there
therefore
is
the
an
answer is
answer?
arbitrary. I think there should be an answer, yes.
There's a correct, objective, moral answer.
By definition, I would say yes.
Well,
I don't think
just don't kill the baby.
I don't think it's like quantum physics. Where
You get
there's
$0
just
and you get the
intrinsic
money.
fuzziness.
You get the yeah.
I don't think there's like an intrinsic fuzziness to this solution. It's just a matter of a lack of information that we have.
What information can we get to make this decision easy?
It's difficult to say exactly, but I would say, let's say a completely perfect machine that is able to accurately determine and accurately analyze the levels of empathy that you would have for a particular person and the requirements that you would have for money. I would say that very few people on this planet would be willing to kill someone, a baby that is, 8 months in the womb already for $1,000,000. I can't imagine a scenario in which anybody would want to do that. I'm sure there are people
I
out
would
there.
easily imagine.
I'm sure there are people out there, but they would be deviations from the general sense of morality that we would all feel.
I don't know. I think that would be the majority. To be honest,
You think majority
for
of people?
$4 million US?
Really, for an 8 months
There's so many
baby?
people who are in total poverty who like this would be so life changing.
Yeah, but that would be a deviation. As I said, we're at a time in the current social climate that we are where, having to think about these particular situations are very extreme. We don't really have to think about them very rarely.
Yeah. Oh,
So-
yeah. We don't. This situation doesn't come up on a daily basis. Surprise, right?
But
Here. Okay. This will go more to my point. There's some studies. I'm not sure if this is real or maybe this is just a thought experiment. But I know that what's it called? Vsauce guy did on a thing where basically they showed that they gave some people a control group a little robot, right? And they told them to whack it, and they were sure, okay, whack it, right? And then they gave another group the same robot, but they gave it a name and a personality, and they said now whack it. And then people, because they anthropomorphized this robot, were hesitant. They didn't want to do it. They felt bad about it. It was pure, like, their utility for hitting the robot went down because you gave it some fake anthropomorphized features.
yeah.
It's
Well,
should we make policies based off of empathy? Like, should we say, don't, like, it's, if a robot's got a name and people care about it, you can't do this, but if one that doesn't, people don't have empathy for it, you are allowed. Can you make policies based off of empathy?
But empathy has to be backed by factual evidence. So we empathize with the robot.
But people do empathize with the robots.
Right, but we empathize it because we imagine that they are more sentient than they actually are.
Yeah.
Even though we anthropomorphize them and we imagine them to be as this sort of conscious, even semi-quasi-conscious entity, it isn't. Either it is or it isn't. And therefore, even though we can say that our feelings drift us in a particular direction, those directions are based on incorrect information.
So you can be incorrectly empathetic with something.
Yes, absolutely.
So okay, how?
And if you were to inform those people, it's actually not alive.
Yes,
then
of course.
would their decisions
They know
change?
It's not. The people who are empathetic for the robot know it's not alive.
Of
They
course,
see
but there's
it's
this
a robot.
intrinsic feeling that we have.
How can you inform somebody that this robot that we anthropomorphized, it's not alive?
Yeah, it's not actually alive, so you're not maximizing.
But that doesn't change they know that. Their reason and logic understands this.
But no utility is being maximized or minimized because of this information.
Absolutely.
Really?
Oh no, well, their empathy is.
Well, yeah, but their empathy. But if someone were to genuinely just be aware of the fact that this...
But that requires us to be a pure logic reasoning machines. And this is a situation where the only distinguishing variable is the empathy. It's the anthropomorphizing of this robot. The logic's still there. Everybody knows it's a robot. Like, it's pretty good. It's obvious. There's nothing in there.
Yeah.
But because we are humans and we have empathy, it changed our behaviors. So how can you say that that we should or shouldn't have this empathy? This is bad empathy.
I'm not saying it's bad empathy.
Like it's unreasoned empathy.
It's unreasoned empathy.
Okay.
It's unnecessary
How do you distinguish
empathy.
if some sort of empathy is reasoned or unreasoned?
Whether or not it has an actual effect on conscious creatures.
So
you can anthropomorphize with a video game character or a movie
what if
character,
I showed you
but the fact of the matter is that character's not real. It's not a real thing.
Okay, what if I showed you that this chicken, beautiful chicken, is a purely biological machine, and every single cell has no consciousness, and it's just, it's a machine. Maybe we are like that. That might be a totally correct position to have. That we are biological machines. Now, if you take that same thing, and okay, now you shouldn't empathize with chicken. Like, there's no reason to. It's a biological machine. Why do you care about the chicken?
Well, what I primarily care about is the conscious effect that it would have. So, does it have the capacity to suffer? Does it have the capacity to feel feelings? Does it have the capacity to think coherently about its state in the universe? These are genuine facts about the nature of human minds.
It's a genuine fact that like certain entities are suffering.
It's a genuine.
You can only know that about yourself.
Well, if you want to get epistemological about it, then yeah, sure. The only thing that we can never know is the fact that we ourselves are conscious.
And are suffering.
Yeah, but I think that's just digging way too...
So you assume that all things like you are also like feeling the same way you do?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that is a reasonable assumption to have.
Probably,
yeah. Yeah. And so going back to the veganism conversation and how I would bring this all back, is that if I were to find out, and again, I don't have my mind made up on the conversation around veganism, but if I were to find out that dogs or cats or any animals, were to suffer at the same exact level that humans were to suffer, and that they were just as conscious as I were conscious, then I would not be able, in my own moral mind, to eat meat the next day. Now, that is, of course, if they are conscious. As far as I'm concerned right now, animals are nowhere near as conscious as humans are. Consciousness is, of course, an enigma at the moment, and we don't really understand what it is, but we have a comprehensive understanding of things that are not conscious and things that are conscious. So we can say something like, we know cells are not conscious because they don't exhibit any of the same attributes that humans do that would exhibit consciousness. If you would ask Deepak Chopra, he'd say the opposite, but I don't agree with Deepak Chopra. So that's why I feel no qualms about slamming my hand against the table.
So for me, my worldview, in the most grandiose sense of it, is totally independent of whether we are, if everybody's a robot or not. Like I don't, like my worldview, at least I think, works the exact same way if every single entity is totally deterministic, like clockwork. And the way that works is that if I hit that robot, it doesn't care. Why? Because it doesn't do it. Like, it doesn't act. If I hit the chicken, it will bark and run away, right? It doesn't want me to hit it. The robot's indifferent. Now, I don't want to hit the chicken, but if there was some, right? But if you conceived a totally robotic chicken, like a pure robot chicken, and I know it's actually the machine like the actual robot in the situation, and I hit it, and it does the exact same behaviors, then my reason will tell me it's just like the robot, right? It's the exact same situation. I can hit it and feel no qualms about it. But it's behaving like a chicken, where it's running away. And then I will say, maybe my empathy is higher there. But now let's say it's not a chicken, it's a person, right? And it's a human robot person, and it doesn't want me to punch it. Like, it will behave exactly like a human would be, maybe punch back or, whatever. Then even if it is a robot, I will still not punch it anymore because of its actions, right? Because I know that I don't have any more power than it, that my utility for it didn't increase by punching it or whatever. and its negative utility in the way it will behave in the future will probably be bad. So I would not do it based off of the consequences.
Okay.
The consequences. So, for example, for me, sure. So if somebody punches a chicken for no reason, that I might care a little chicken because of empathy, but I'll be more troubled by the person's. Why would they do that? Like, what type of person would do that?
Mm-hmm.
That would be very concerning. Like, this person is probably not good in society. They're just beating up animals, right?
So you have a reaction, a particular
yes,
negative
but
reaction.
not like tons of empathy for the chicken. I'll be like, okay, I'm sorry, chicken.
Yeah.
Right.
But you have a reaction.
I eat you every day, right? So like, my logic couldn't be consistent if I'm like, oh, poor chicken, right?
But don't you think your empathy for that chicken would increase if you were to find out that it was feeling the same exact sensations as a human?
Yes, my empathy would increase, but I also see my empathy as fallible. Like, I see my empathy as purely irrational.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I could, I do behave off empathy. I like people descriptively, but I can't, my logic will be like, okay, but I eat this chicken and, tons of chickens die. Like, we have this trillions of, 2 trillion chickens or something.
Yeah.
And the only reason they're alive is because of human created, like, this system where they thrive so much. Like, so in that regard, I have empathy descriptively, but I cannot say that I should act on it for any reason. Like, for me, that would be irrational to act on empathy.
Yeah.
In the same way that, like, because I can't trust empathy. Empathy gives me wrong decisions, like that robot scenario.
Yeah.
Empathy, if I punch the robot and I punch the robot with a name, being more hesitant to that feels to me irrational.
But why do you think it's the wrong decision? You know it's the wrong decision because you have information now and you are able to use that information to analyze a more moral society as opposed to a more immoral society. So just as a caveat real quick, because we're talking so much about empathy, I agree with Paul Bloom. I am against empathy. I think empathy, more often than not, has us reaching incorrect conclusions rather than correct conclusions. But what I would say is that empathy is a good way to induce us to do a particular good thing, or to care, or to get us to care about something that we've been evolutionarily programmed to care about, because in a general sense, it is in the benefit of society.
Well, your entire morality system is based off of empathy of humans.
No. My morality system is based on what would increase the level of well-being, specifically on the level of humans. Now, I distinguish this from empathy specifically because empathy tends to get us to incorrect decisions on how to reach that well-being state.
Why did you distinguish humans? Why did you say humans rather than everything that can feel pain?
Oh, this is why we're talking about veganism and where I draw the line, and I'm not convinced.
Or anything, like, because the reason you would decide on humans would be. I'm just curious. What's your basis for saying humans?
Yeah. So just very quick, let me finish it on empathy, and then I'll absolutely answer your question. So the first thing, in regards to empathy, the reason why I am against empathy, even though it seems like my basis for morality is based on empathy, is that empathy gives us a lot of the times it forces us to reach incorrect conclusions about how to reach the optimal state of human well-being. And there's been numerous studies about this, as I mentioned before, how empathy tends to force us to care about the people closer to us rather than the people that are farther away from us. It forces us to care about the few over the many, and I think these are incorrect decisions if we really care about maximizing the amount of human well-being.
Totally agree.
Yeah, so now, going back onto how do I make the distinction between humans and animals? I go back to the state of human consciousness and the fact that I generally tend to care about how animals and how I choose to anthropomorphize anything, really. So as I kind of alluded to this originally when I talked about how we have a somewhat comprehensive view of consciousness, even though we don't really understand how it originated. But we know that dogs are not as conscious as humans are. For instance, a dog will not be able to pass the mirror test, in which it can't recognize itself when it looks at itself in the mirror. So because of that, I find it morally justifiable to eat meat with animals at the same level of consciousness as dogs are, because I don't think that dogs are anywhere near as conscious as us. They're nowhere near to the same level of appreciating life as we are. And so I find it perfectly morally acceptable to eat meat at that level. There are some animals, however, that you would have to amplify the sense of consciousness, amplify the sense of pain that they feel, and the sense of self-recognition that they have, such as with elephants. So I would make a distinction between eating elephants and eating something such as a cricket, especially since insects or ants specifically don't have a nervous system, so obviously you wouldn't have no qualms about smashing
In
plants.
contrast, just to clarify, so how I would approach this situation is purely my personal utility. So I would say, what's my utility for eating an elephant? Like none, right? I don't get no benefit. Like I can get chicken, meat, cow, whatever, right? And I like elephants. They're cute and they're going endangered, right? Like, uh, so I gain no benefit unless they were a huge, they were a huge domestic animal and we could like it would reduce meat costs by an insane amount. Like it would be very unlikely for my utility for an elephant to be more as food than as just existing by itself.
Yeah.
For example, the same way with cats and dogs, right? Now, the reason I don't eat meat is because there's no great, or no cat or dog meat, is because there's no great cat and dog meat industry, and my utility for a cat and dog is as pets, right? Everything is based off of my personal utility. So why do we care about humans? Because humans have utility to me, and they have utility to me in the format of what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Their economic utility, their actions, their entertainment, talking, education, whatever. While animals, like for example, bees or ants or whatever, like those, they don't have much utility to me, so I don't care what happens to them much. So everything's based off my personal utility, I don't go to the overall human.
But would you say that the overall human well-being affects your utility? Your utility would be increased if human well-being
In a
would
very
be increased.
abstract notion, because what would increase my utility if, yeah, sure, if humans do well. Because if humans do well, you create more medicine, more technology, more, the economic benefits, and as, and stuff like that. But if you pick a random human that I've never met, them being happier means nothing to me.
Yeah.
Unless I start talking with them and know them personally, and I'm sure I would be very happy if they're happy, right? Like if you tell me a personal story about somebody who's going through a hard time somewhere, then I'll be like, I care about this person now because of the story, because of the empathy that I've gained from the story. But just some random person that has no name that I have not anthropomorphized at all, totally dehumanized, right? Like I had, if I told you there was 7 billion people today instead of 7.6 or whatever, that means nothing to you. 600 million people who would exist but don't means nothing to you.
Yeah.
But if I said somebody in your family died, or even somebody you haven't met, some close family relative that you haven't actually met, the closeness of it matters to you a little bit. It negatively affects somebody that you do care about. Like maybe your grandpa cared about this person.
Well, we can also bring this back to human well-being, where a society that is contingent on caring more about your people that are very, 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 very close to you, such as your mother, your father, and your sister, especially since these are the people that are close to you as you are growing up, there is a reason why this is evolutionarily beneficial to prioritize those people over people that you've never met.
Yes, of course. It makes that.
So that still goes back to overall human well-being. This sensation.
No, that's not overall human well-being. That's
no, I would argue because
genetics and evolution.
Well, no, I would say in the net aggregate set of what you have, human well-being is increased when some particular people only care more about their family members. Otherwise, if everybody cared about everyone equally, then overall human well-being would go down.
It's the grand tree of life, right?
Yeah.
And now we got unlucky here, right? Or we got lucky, I don't know, where our lineage, our human well-being is kind of easy to categorize, right? Because all the other humans died out. But what if we had Neanderthals and all the other Homo sapiens and whatever, and those still there? would we circle them? Would they be part of it because they are higher consciousness? Like a species as a concept, it's all one family tree,
Yeah.
right? We're all one. This is very, hippie maybe, but like we're all one, right? It's
Yeah,
all,
yeah.
the lineage goes back, and we circle this one. We circle humans because it shares certain properties that we care about. Uh, but just because it's a nice little cluster that came to be by coincidence, or not coincidence, by whatever, the history of the world, we got this cluster. Saying that we should care about this cluster more than this bigger cluster, or maybe all animals. Like, why not all mammals or all tetrapods? I don't know. Uh, for me, I I will separate it. I'll say I care about the things that give utility to me. And sure, humans, as a general concept, if humans do well, I do well, so it benefits me. But uh, if you tell me that this is a talking cow and it is very interesting and very entertaining, I don't want it to die too. I care about this cow too now. Like if this cow is gives me some, it makes movies or it created a new technology. This cow, even if it's totally separate, just now because this cow has utility to me, and it did something that is not that's value to me not by just being food. Now I care about it, and I will protect it just as much as any human.
Yeah.
But if it's just beneficial for me for its food and a little bit of empathy, right? I can maybe even ignore the empathy if you want to do like this, like we're all like Spock, right? We're all like pure reason, logic thing, whatever. And then the chicken means nothing. Like if you get rid of empathy, animals are just food. Everything you try to anthropomorphize is just what they are and what like utility they give to me. And also, but if you inject the empathy, then you start caring about like things that a thing that has a human-like face or something that's kind of cute. Like why do we care about certain animals? Why do we care about pandas more than we care about like certain frogs that are much more useful for their ecosystem? And like we'll put millions and millions of dollars into saving these pandas because they're cute.
Yeah.
Not all of these like there's plants that are going extinct that hold ecosystems together. They're so valuable, but we give money to the pandas because they're cute. That's where empathy goes wrong. So do you include empathy in your calculus? Maybe.
Well, I'll finish it off. Well, what I have to say at least, and then I'll let you have the last word on the topic. So yeah, as you kind of alluded to the growing circle of empathy that we tend to have, and I would associate this with the moral zeitgeist, where morals tend to change, but they still change in the same general direction. And so people seem to be caring more and more about the fact, or at the very least, they're realizing more and more that animals suffer at a very similar level that human beings suffer. So their circle of empathy grows. And so if we have enough people in which their circle of empathy grows, or they manage to convince the majority of people on the planet, hey, animals suffer the same as us, and people were to realize this fact, then people would immediately jump to the conclusion that, well, we probably shouldn't be eating animals, but I'm still going to eat it because it's good. And, it's hard to give it up. But if given the decision between a genuine animal who was killed in a factory farm, and therefore he is now on your plate, or artificial meat that tastes exactly the same, exactly as meat, then I'd hedge a bet that most people would prefer the artificial meats.
You can buy artificial meats right now. They're just way more expensive.
Is it just as good?
I've had it. It tastes like chicken.
Tastes like chicken? Okay.
And they're not very popular because they're so much more expensive.
Yeah. And then going over to the what you said about what was it that you said at the end?
I don't know. What were your empathy like?
Whether or not we have empathy into the equation, and this goes back to why I said that empathy tends us to bring us to the wrong conclusions about some decisions. The reason why we have empathy is because it's a function that humans have that is evolutionarily beneficial that increases the likelihood of us preserving the species, passing on
or
our
passing our
genes.
genes, not
Yeah.
preserving the species per se.
Passing our genes. So because of this, we have this intuitive uh, structure of empathy instilled within us. And even though the structure of empathy can be correct on most occasions, it is also incorrect on many other occasions. And because society is consistently changing, I would argue that we're now at a particular point in time, especially with the internet, especially with the type of information that we can very easily access, that our empathy tends to go haywire more often than not. So our empathy is forces us to make incorrect decisions about human well-being, which is what catalyzed our intuition for empathy in the first place. So now we have this kind of feedback effect where, well, what do we do? How do we change this? Well, I would say, well, we have to think more logically about these situations, and we have to understand that empathy is very easily driven by our cognitive biases. Even though at one point maybe it was evolutionarily beneficial in the same way that I view religion, at this point in time maybe it's something that we need to kind of outgrow or we need to outthink now. And so those are my two final closing statements. One, of course, yes, the moral zeitgeist is progressing, and therefore our empathy circle is increasing to more and more species. Maybe at some points it will increase to the point where we care about chickens. I doubt it. I think it's very unlikely given what we understand now about how chickens feel pain and how they tend to view conscious, or how they tend to be conscious. And two, yes, empathy, it can be good, but I think overall it is a net negative, even though it was the first thing that catalyzed our moral intuitions in the first place. Now we're stuck with these moral intuitions that we have and these moral goals that we have when it comes to human well-being, but our empathy tends to drive us in the wrong direction more often than not. So I'll let you finish it off.
All right. So I would, my position would be that empathy is totally neutral. Like people have it or they don't, and saying that they ought to or should have or it gets us to the wrong position, for me is a little confusing because I don't see a correct or incorrect position to have. I would say that people do have empathy and they will act on that empathy, and people with empathy create society, and they will create certain laws that take into account empathy. So descriptively, you will get a certain reflection of the people within it. Now, if there's those people who do have empathy, and there's one person who doesn't have empathy for a chicken, those people, I feel, will not be able to convince the person who doesn't have empathy for the chicken that they ought to have empathy for the chicken, without appealing to something that they do care about. So, so veganism depends on caring about certain animals for purely empathetic reasons, well, not purely, because you can have some environmental arguments, but if you ignore like the actual arguments and you do ethical veganism arguments, they're appealing to you should have this empathy, you should care about this animal that you otherwise didn't. Why? And then for me, there is no why. It's just because we care about it, and that's part of the human. Like, if we all care about it, you should care about it too. So that's sort of my position on veganism.
Okay, cool. Do you want to go on to, well, we're currently at an hour and 20 minutes. Do you want to go on to free will, or do you want to save that for the next podcast?
We can save it for another podcast because I don't have much to say about it. But I think we had a great conversation. And if you were watching and you had disagreements with one of us or some insightful opinion or rude remarks, leave them in the comments below.
Yeah, I can't wait for all those dislikes to come in.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, we don't have a title for it, so it's very difficult to close out this podcast.
Once again, thank you, Weed.
Oh, thank you very much, Weed, yes, for sponsoring us. Very appreciated. Hopefully they'll give you some free samples so you can kind of test it out for the first time. Mm-hmm. That'd be wonderful.
I think we shouldn't smoke weed because weed's alive and has cells, and plants, we should care about them. You ought to care about weed.
Did you know that weed is the devil's lettuce?
Oh, never mind. Don't care about weed. It's the devil's.
Yeah, it's the
Sorry, weed, for ruining this wonderful advertisement. I should stop talking right
Alright.
now.
Well, anyways, everyone, thank you very much for giving this a listen. I hope people actually waited to the 1 hour and 20-minute mark of this podcast. Is a pretty
Just
long
put it
time.
at 1.25 speed.
Oh yeah, oh man, I tend to speak really fast, so I tried to slow down my speech for this podcast. But anyways, thank you all very much for listening to this. Whether you're listening to this on iTunes, Spotify, or you're just listening to it on YouTube, thank you very much regardless. It's been a pleasure here to be with my friends, weed promoter, non-smoker.
I don't. Sorry, Mom. I don't speak. Smoke weed.
Yeah, sorry.
Don't do drugs, kids.
So thank you very much. I'm excited for the next episode where we'll probably talk about free will and another topic. And so awesome. Thank you very much for being here, for being my
Thank
my
you.
lackey here on the Secular Atom. How does it feel like to be on the Secular Atom channel?
That's trouble.
Troubling?
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what kind of reaction this podcast is going to have because the video that got me a good amount of subscribers was one where I was defending Sargon of Akkad for the Patreon decision. And some people were commenting on that video, supporting me for the video, and then I clicked on
You
their
got
channels.
the Sargon crew.
Yeah, now I got the Sargon.
No.
It's Molyneux as well, so that's
That's even worse.
yeah, those are.
And we'll explain more on next episode.
All right, thank you very much, guys. Have a nice weekend or night. I don't know when I'm gonna upload this. Have a nice week.